the feminists failed me. I'm sorry.
I think the feminists did fail her.
It
was another era.
She was 22. We're supposed to have moved on from that. Don't hark back on something you did that was wrong.
Talk TV. It's the only place where you get the truth.
On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV.
Hello and welcome. I'm Rosanna Lockwood. You're with Talk TV, on radio, online, and on your smart speaker. This is prime time, where we bring you all the stories that matter. On the show tonight, billions of pounds promised to Ukraine from the sale of Chelsea Football Club lay dormant in a UK bank account. We ask, what's the hold-up? Clouds gather above Birmingham City Council as it braces for the biggest budget cut made by a local authority ever. And US voters head to the polls on Super Tuesday, with the country braced for a gruelling rematch of 2020's presidential election. Plus, we'll bring you our nightly panel looking at other stories making headlines today, with UK editor of Politico Jack Blanchard and political editor of The Sun on Sunday, Kate Ferguson. This is Prime Time. Now, he was once the most high-profile Russian oligarch in Britain, the billionaire tycoon owner of one of the most famous sporting names in the world. When he bought Chelsea Football Club in 2003, Roman Abramovich became an international celebrity. Super yachts, private jets, sprawling mansions. But where did all this wealth come from? Despite widely reported links between Abramovich and the Russian President Vladimir Putin, many in the West showed little interest in knowing anything, so long as they benefited from the cash. Now, Abramovich's capital was more than welcome here in the UK until, of course, the brutal invasion of Ukraine popped his beautiful billionaire's bubble for good. Suddenly facing asset seizures and sanctions, it was made abundantly clear that Abramovich's ownership of his prized Chelsea Football Club was over. He did try to keep hold of it, but eventually was forced to sell the club in May 2022 for some 4.2 billion quid, and was only allowed to do so because he was under sanctions at the time as a pro-Kremlin oligarch, on the condition that the net proceeds of £2.5 billion would be spent on helping victims of the Ukraine war. But the money has not been spent. It's frozen, while Abramovich and the British government argue over what it can be used on. So let's talk about what you can buy for that price, the price of a football club, essentially. If you're in the arms business, you could buy 10 of our new warships. If you're a teacher, it could pay for 71 new state-of-the-art secondary schools. And if you're in Ukraine, it could go somewhere to helping the 14.6 million citizens needing aid, and maybe a few of the 5.9 million Ukrainians scattered around Europe as refugees too. It's that last one that the money is actually earmarked for, all the victims of the war in Ukraine via a foundation fund. And it was supposed to be the biggest non-governmental aid package Europe's ever seen. Problem is, 2 years of war have passed and nada so far. So for more on this, let's go to speak to Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik. Thank you very much for joining us. And just give us a sense of what these funds could do for the people of Ukraine.
Hello, Roseanne. Thank you so much for having me. Well, we indeed need those funds. And as of right now, the total losses and the need for rebuild for our country already reached 500 billion. And so we need every penny and every dime to cover for the expenses. And these expenses, they grow every single day because Russia does not stop its attack. On January 2nd, there was an attack and a missile hit near where I live. And so my windows were ripped out of the frames and thrown in the middle of the room. And it was one of the most terrifying experiences. And you know, Roseanne, I can pay for my windows, but so many of my neighbors cannot. And some people lost their homes and their loved ones at that attack. And we are just talking about one incident. So we need to gather all the funds and especially Russian frozen funds throughout the world, both Russian state funds and oligarch money. And in total, the calculations are that, that the states have frozen about 500 billion. Right now, it's like approximately exact amount that we calculated that we would need for the rebuild.
I mean, thank you for painting the picture there, reminding our viewers why this type of money is so desperately needed. In terms of where the money has come from, it's oligarch money, basically at some point siphoned out of business deals with the Kremlin and from Putin. How do you feel about that? Does that give it an added meaning?
Absolutely, it's only just. Rosanna, we have seen throughout those 2 years how people from all over the world, including United Kingdom, are supporting us with donations, with financial aid, humanitarian aid, and that is great. But for how long people of the free countries are supposed to be paying for what Putin destroyed? It's absolutely unfair, and it is also unfair to all the good people out there. So we need to go forward and make sure that Putin is paying for what he broke, and that 500 billion of frozen Russian assets are being seized and used for the sake of Ukraine, because it is the right thing to do. It is just, and this is how we would show the precedent to all other dictatorships in the world, that if you start a full-scale invasion, your money will be gone.
Now, in terms of the politics of funding, sending funds to Ukraine, you're well aware of this. I know that, you know, when we have elections in the UK coming up this year, there's elections in the US, when we've had various elections around Europe, there is always a big debate about how much funding goes to Ukraine. Talk to us about what it feels like to see that support kind of wavering sometimes, or to see people debating against sending funding to Ukraine.
It is incredibly painful because, you know, here we feel that we are protecting the whole democratic world. We are protecting Europe, and we know that Putin would not stop unless he is stopped. And this is what we are doing here. And it is also incredibly hard to explain to our soldiers who are bravely fighting at the front what's going on and what the delay is about, because we have heard the promises to stay with Ukraine for as long as it takes. And right now there is this significant delay. We are short of ammunition, and we are feeling this shortage every single day. And our soldiers are struggling, and they're just waiting for this help to arrive. And it is very hard to say that you don't know when it's going to arrive, and if it's going to arrive like anytime soon. And they are looking at you for some hope, and you don't know if you can give them that hope. This is why we really hope that the politicians in the democratic countries will do the right thing, because this question is bigger than Ukraine. It's a question of the security of Europe, of the security of the democratic world. And no matter how elections go, Russia would not disappear. They would not, change their mind and just go back. We will have to fight them, and we will have to do that together. So we are calling for all good people to keep their focus on what is going on in Ukraine and get us the help that we desperately need.
Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik, thank you very much for making time and in putting that position to our viewers this evening.
Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini. Indeed. Look, for more on the money and the wavering support for Ukraine, we can speak now to investigative journalist John Sweeney in the studio, as well as reporter and football finance commentator and chair of the Manchester United Supporters Trust, Michael Crick, here with us to talk through the football politics of it all. Thank you, gentlemen, both. John, good to see you back in the UK. You've been reporting valiantly from Ukraine for almost up to 2 years. In your trademark orange hat, so I'm pleased you brought that in this evening. You're listening to Kira Rudik MP talking there about what the funding would mean for Ukraine. That must chime a lot with what you saw.
Oh, this money is desperately needed. Number one, defence. We haven't given the Ukrainians anything like enough stuff to defeat the Russian killing machine. I'll give you an example. We've given the Ukrainians 14 Challenger 2 tanks. And they've knocked out 2,000 Russian tanks, and the Russians got 8,000 left. The tank factory, the Challenger 2 tank factory, is now a housing estate. Artillery, Europe, and I'm going to include Britain in Europe because Britain is in Europe, in my view. But we said we'd give the Ukrainians 1 million artillery shells, and we've given a third of that. The North Koreans are supplying the Russians with 1 million shells. Europe, with all its riches, is not able to compete with North Korea in terms of shell delivery. And the consequence of that is that the Russian killing machine is moving forwards at enormous cost to the life of the Russian soldiers, but Vladimir Putin doesn't care about that. He doesn't give a damn. Look just what happened to Navalny, etc., etc., etc. So the big problem is that in the West, our rhetoric is wonderful, but we have over-delivered, we have over-promised and we've under-delivered, and we are in danger of betraying Ukraine.
What do you make then of the bureaucratic tie-up, if we can even call it that has gone on with this 2.5 billion in funds from the sale of Chelsea Football Club? Reportedly, some of the argument is about which occupied regions of Ukraine it should or shouldn't go to.
I wanted, listen, you know, there was a kid who was killed by Russian rocket the other day, who was wearing Batman pajamas. I don't know if you've seen the pictures on social media.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking. And that I've seen it, you know, on repeat. The Battle of Kyiv, the Russians were saying we don't target civilians. And I saw in the morning after the Kyiv TV tower had been hit by a Russian rocket, I saw the people from the morgue take away an old man, a mum, and her 5-year-old daughter. And I've seen the corpses with my own eyes again and again and again on repeat. So the idea that there are people in the Treasury who are shifting bottoms and moving their bits of paper around, while this enormous emergency faces Ukraine. First of all, the first priority is to survive and defeat the Russians. The second is to rebuild the country. And this money does not belong to Roman Abramovich. I mean, how can I put this in plain language? He's a crook and a gangster, so big no one dare call him a crook and a gangster. Oh, sorry, I just did. Well done.
Yeah.
But come on, get your act together. Pull your finger out, people. Give this money. I mean, the way they phrased it is good. This is for the good of people in Ukraine who've lost their homes. There's tons of them. Do it.
Do it now. Get the funds out. Look, Michael, on the point of football, did it take for, I know the re-invasion of Ukraine, but the onset of the real war in Ukraine for the last 2 years, for people to wake up and realise where some of the money was coming from that was owning football clubs in this country?
Yeah, I think it did. And by the way, I'm not chairman of the Manchester United Supporters Trust. I helped set it up, but I stress that because it's not fair on the chap that is.
Fair enough.
But absolutely right. I mean, Abramovich was allowed to take over Chelsea. Can't remember what year it was now, the early 2000s. And there was barely any comment about his associations with Putin. OK, at that time, we were a lot friendlier with Putin in this country than we are now. And indeed, he even visited this country at one point. But it was clear that was tainted money that he was buying one of our greatest football clubs with. And now I think people are being a bit more careful about this. The Saudi takeover of Newcastle, there's been a lot more complaints about that. They were still allowed to do it. Thankfully, we've moved on in that way. As for the other points I mean, I can't disagree with a single point that John makes, which is unusual for me. But he's absolutely right. I mean, we have got to stiffen our resolve in the West. I mean, we've been pretty good in this country, but Europe and America are wavering. It must be awful for the Ukrainians, as Kira has shown, and we've got the huge uncertainty surrounding Trump's election. I think that basically on this particular issue, Sunak needs to get a grip and say, right, well, whatever it takes, we're going to do that right now, preferably with help from Starmer, because Starmer is going to be Prime Minister within about 10 months, possibly sooner than that. And he will have to, the case may still be going on then. So you can get agreement between the two on that, wonderful. But, there is a lot more that we can be doing in the West. And I think in the long term, we need to think about, we need to start rearming. Instead of, a cut in national insurance tomorrow, I think that the Chancellor, if he's got spare money, he needs to increase our defence budget. And we need to, this needs to be a long-term project, not just to help Ukraine, but to stop the expansion of this dictatorial, very nasty regime that threatens ultimately all of us.
Michael makes some points there, John. I got my tax summary last week, quite timely, and the money that Britain pays in foreign aid and in defence spending is right down at the bottom of the list. Could you see that changing with Labour?
I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure I do. The problem is we need to start building factories to make things we've forgotten to make anymore. We've been passing for far too long the dividend from 1989. One of my weird political heroes is John Major, who, although I didn't like him at the time, out of office he's played splendidly. And what he said is we need to spend, just as Michael said, it's kind of weird for both of us as saying good on John Major.
No, I agree with you on that as well.
We should spend
Most
money.
underrated.
We should spend money on defence.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm not a warmonger at all.
No.
But because I've seen dead kids killed by Russian rockets, I don't want to see my kids or even my granddaughter, and she's only 3 at the moment, but to end up fighting the tyrannies. And behind Vladimir Putin is Xi in China, and they're watching. But the great anxiety is that Trump gets in. And this is something that my Ukrainian friends, they're really worried about, again. But we're not doing enough to help them. We're not doing enough to police sanctions properly. And, we've actually got the money from the sale of Chelsea. And by the way, if you're asking, I support Tranmere Rovers.
I was asking, yeah.
So there is, and I'm not the chairman of the supporters club of that either. But as a good Tranmere bloke, I would say, give the 2.5 billion to Ukraine and do that now. I mean, I'd take you to the hospitals I've seen smashed up.
You would think it would be a straightforward vote win if that's what they care about, let alone the funding and the requirement that was needed.
We've got to be tough across the board. My other hero, apart from John Major, is President Macron of France. So never mind, The Simpsons talking about cheese-eating surrender monkeys. I'm going to have to say this. The thing is, the Americans are now, if I may put it like this, les singes qui mangent du fromage et qui capitulent. They are the Americans. I want to say to my American friends, stop it, because you're ending up being, as Homer Simpson called the French, cheese-eating surrendery monkeys.
Lily-livered, yeah. Whatever's being slipped into Macron's bourguignon at the moment is certainly strong. It is, because he is certainly taking a very hard line with Russia. Look, gentlemen, we're going to have to wrap it there. It was a fascinating discussion to open the show. John Sweeney, Michael Crick, thank you. Well, next here on Primetime, Birmingham on the brink. Its City Council votes on massive cuts to local services as it struggles to balance its books.
Hey, very good morning to you.
Thanks for joining us.
You're with Talk TV,
on radio, online.
You're on your smart speaker.
Now, you ain't going to have an Eve it, me old Chinas, but a new report is calling for a new definition of cockney.
All right, Jeremy, me old China.
All right,
Rosie, oi, oi, treacle.
When J.K. Rowling says, let's just be honest, that's all she's saying, let's just be honest. When a man goes out and kills, we should talk about them as what they are, a biological man. Trans woman, it's not a woman. Trans woman is a man.
Lee would have to go much further than his statement. I mean, he did say that he spoke clumsily and he understood the Prime Minister's position, but I think he'd need to say that he'd got it wrong.
Then I had a phone call this morning from City Council, a lovely woman called Anna. And yeah, I've just received an email just saying that, I'm going to be getting a badge.
Quite right too.
It's that time again to get the violins out. That's right. Prince Harry has lost his bid for UK security after moaning he'd been singled out.
You might as well be discussing an invasion of Daleks for all I really get this. but I am now on social media, having been dragged off my £8 Nokia, reluctantly kicking and screaming. I'm a huge hit on Instagram, as you probably know.
What are you doing? I was just about to do it.
Ooh! It's Carry On. What just happened?
We're missing.
There was a suggestion by some that maybe it would be nice to put a statue of the Queen on the fourth plinth. Mr. Khan apparently wasn't too keen on that.
I'm sorry. I know it's coming and I can't stop laughing.
So he suggested alternatives. There's a sweet potato.
That's quite a small statue then. Wasn't there also a prostitute?
A trans sex worker.
You don't really need one of those in Trafalgar Square. You just got to walk up to Soho. It's only about 40 minutes.
Why do you know this?
Because I know everything.
Was he just unlucky getting that question with an ice cream, or is it a sign of something more?
Seemed like he was on a late-night show to attract a young demographic, and they put him in an ice cream store.
I read the statement this morning from the family, and if any police officer reads that statement, if you don't cry for what you read from what the family is saying, it's heartbreaking, then you shouldn't be a police officer.
The UK, I'd say, has lots of racism within it. I don't necessarily think it's a racist country, but it permeates our institutions.
Yeah, but for her to say, come out and vote, and by the way, when I was 22 years old and I had an affair with a married man that I knew was married, the feminists failed me. I'm sorry.
I think the feminists did fail her.
It
was another era.
She was 22. We're supposed to have moved on from that. Don't hark back on something you did that was wrong.
Talk TV. It's the only place where you get the truth.
Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time with me, Rosanna Lockwood. Now, it is the biggest budget cut any local authority has ever had to make. Birmingham Council needs to save some 300 million quid over the next 2 years to balance its books after falling into effective bankruptcy. A meeting of its members is continuing tonight, 5 hours after it started to vote on what services could be slashed in order to find that cash. And this comes a day after Nottingham City Council approved similar cuts to plug a reported 50 million quid budget gap. Joining me for more on this, The Sun on Sunday's political editor, Kate Ferguson. Kate, thank you. And it's a story we've revisited a few times on the show, because sadly it's just been this domino effect of councils across the country just declaring bankruptcy. And time and again we hear it's because of the cost of things. Adult social care comes up a lot, but also a little bit of mismanagement, local level as well. Birmingham's got things particularly bad though. I mean, they're looking at enormous council tax rises, I think around 21%, but having to slash services. What's been going wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Birmingham is one of the biggest councils in Europe, and they've got themselves in a massive mess financially. So over the next 2 years, we're expecting them to have to hike council tax by 21%. That's on top of lots of cuts to basically anything non-statutory. So councils have to do some stuff legally, like look after children in need, do some adult social care. We're expecting them to cut back on everything that doesn't have a legal requirement. Effectively, it looks like it's for two main reasons. One, as you point out, a bit of financial mismanagement. They've had this huge equal pay payout, which means that basically a bunch of women through the union bought an equal pay claim. I think that left them with a bill of something like £1 billion, so a huge bill. At the same time, they've had obviously the squeeze that every other local authority has had, inflation running really hot, and it's just left them totally in the red.
Now, residents of Birmingham can be excused for feeling despairing. If you imagine getting your council tax bill through and it's 21% higher in this year of all years, and then thinking about the services that are going to be slashed, whether it's your bins being taken out less or your lighting or whatever. But one of the things people are focusing on is actually cuts to cultural services, if we can call it that, things like exhibitions and art museums and libraries, which are obviously the cornerstones of a lot of democratic societies. You don't want to see those things being cut. That must be a big blow.
Totally. I think that the councils do two things. They do statutory services, which unless you're receiving them, you probably won't really notice, like adult social care, children in need. But the thing you do notice from your council is the local sports centre, the local library, the local art exhibition, and basically all that stuff in Birmingham you expect to be cut really right to the bone. And you are left with this question, if you're a local, of, well, what am I spending my money on? What's in it for me? And the answer at the moment in that local authority is not very much.
Look, 19 councils have approached the government in the last few months asking for help from central government. Are they going to get that help with regard to more funding? No?
I don't think so. So we've obviously got the budget tomorrow, Jeremy Hunt doing this big budget. What we do know is that Jeremy Hunt's been trying to save every little penny here and there to try and do these pre-election tax cuts. And what happens when you try and do pre-election tax cuts when the economy isn't growing? You're going to cut services. What are the services you tend to cut? Local government. So no, I don't think anything's going to improve from council's perspective in terms of the grant that they're getting from central government.
And if Labour win the next election, or whoever wins the next election, but of course Labour are polling ahead, they seem to be inheriting quite a big problem with the councils.
Huge problem, you know. you had that famous note from Liam Byrne last time, right? Like, there's no money left. Labour very keen to stress that they're not going to hike taxes if they come into power. They're going to have a bad economic inheritance. We don't expect them to find billions down the back of the sofa. So I think this strain on local government grants, local government services, is going to be here for the long term.
Kate, stay with us. We'll have you back on later on the show if you don't mind. Some more stories together. That's Kate Ferguson, political editor of The Sun on Sunday. Let's move on to some royal stories now. The Princess of Wales will attend the Trooping the Colour ceremony on June 8th. This is according to the Ministry of Defence in what is the first announcement of her return to official duty since undergoing abdominal surgery. Kensington Palace yet to confirm that news. And this comes as Kate was apparently pictured for the first time since her hospitalisation being driven in Windsor by her mother. Now, the photograph, which many of you have probably seen somewhere online, was obtained by American outlet TMZ, reportedly taken by an unauthorised paparazzi, and we will not be showing it. Meanwhile, the King is facing growing calls from campaigners to say sorry and make reparations for ancestral links to slavery. So there's a lot to go over. Unpacking all the latest on all things royal with me is royal biographer Tom Bauer. Always good to see you in the studio. Thank you for coming in. First off, the photograph, because I think that's what a lot of people will be thinking. Why aren't you showing it to us this evening? Explain to us what happens when you have things like an unauthorised paparazzi picture and why that's different from an official one.
Well, I think it all just started really with Death of Diana, when the paparazzi were accused of hounding her in the chase into the tunnel where she sadly died. And the argument after that was that the paparazzi shouldn't be rewarded for taking photographs which are totally unofficial and, on the other hand, also often very destructive.
And obviously the palace and the Prince and Princess of Wales have consistently asked for the privacy to be maintained. The last we saw of Kate sort of in public was around Christmas time, so that's why the speculation mill has been in overdrive. Do you think this latest announcement from the Ministry of Defence that she's going to be at the Trooping of the Colour, albeit months away, will put some of that speculation to bed?
Yes, I do. And I think also the sighting was very helpful, because I think that a lot of people, I mean, the social media went absolutely mad about speculation. But I think she has been very ill, there's no doubt about it. And I think the recovery is much longer than the palace initially indicated. It would be over by Easter. But listen, I'm delighted that she's going to come back. I think the royal family relies on her. I think British values rely on her. She's a wonderful person. And we just hope that the pressure on her hasn't actually hampered her recovery.
Remind us what the Trooping of the Colour event is and why it's important that she's there.
Well, it's the official birthday of the monarch, and it's a terrific display in Horse Guards, a great show of pageantry, a great moment of Britain showing the world that we are still a monarchy, and much more. And of course, the Queen, the late Queen, always loved it. It was a great moment for her. Hopefully, the King will be there too. We'll see. But it's a moment when Britain actually shines, and hopefully it's not raining on the day either.
It's actually my earliest childhood memory was going to Trooping the Colour when I was about 3 years old, and my father, who was a serving officer, had something to do with the event. So it brings back memories, and it is a sort of key moment in the British calendar. Look, let's talk a little bit about the pressure that King Charles is under at the moment to apologise and pay reparations for ancestral links to slavery. What do you make of this? Not so much the demands for apology, but how King Charles will likely respond to this.
Well, I hope he's going to be resolute in saying no. I mean, I think this whole thing has become mired in money. That's really the sad thing and the dangerous aspect of this reparations and the apology. Because let's take it at the start. Britain stopped the slavery trade in 1704. There were no slaves on the west and east coast of Africa, except when the British came, except they were brought there by Arabs and African traders. So it isn't just Britain that's responsible, but Britain was responsible for ending the trade. And many hundreds of British sailors died, stopping other countries taking their slaves after 1704 across the Atlantic to their colonies. So I think Britain has absolutely nothing to apologise for, because that's part of history. There were slaves in all countries, and I've got to tell you, quite a lot of Britons were taken as slaves by Arab countries.
That is your, that's the information that you've given me, but that is also your opinion on that information. But what about King Charles? What kind of position do you think?
The position he's in is that he could say no. If the government orders him to apologise, he's going to find it very hard to resist. I don't think a Conservative government is going to order him to, but it's quite possible that a Labour government might order him to. I'd hope he'd say no, because in the end, I think it's very damaging to Britain to start apologising for all aspects of history going back centuries. I think it's something which we shouldn't begin to consider, and I don't think it's helped.
We don't have another side of that debate represented this evening. To which I will say that obviously we've heard a lot of voices, especially from the Black and African communities over the last few days, saying yes, they do want to see reparations. This does make a difference to them. They do want to hear apologies. And of course, we have seen enormous transformation amongst the Caribbean in recent years, with people basically trying to sort of distance themselves from Britain and from the royal family in those cultures. So we can't say that the point of view you've expressed this evening is the overwhelming one.
Well, it's an opinion. I can only give my opinion. But what I do think is that the money aspect is rather sinister, because you see, look, they got money for Black Lives Matter. They got money for when there was the pulling down of the statue in Bristol. Both those funds have ended up in allegations of fraud. I mean, where is this money meant to go to that Britain is handing out? And I think on today, when the Church of England has been told that the 100 million they offered is not enough, it should be $1 billion. I mean, why $1 billion? Why not $5 billion? I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's history. This is hundreds of years ago. This isn't something for which the present generation should be expected to pay. So I think it's distorting our view, and it would distort our image abroad if we start apologising for all aspects of the empire and the rest.
Again, that is the opinion of you, Tom Bauer. Do you think it is the one that is shared by the palace?
I think it's shared by the palace, but of course it's very sensitive for the palace. They've got to be guided by the government. And that is the problem, that it's quite possible that one government, I don't think Conservative government, the Labour government, will compel the King to apologise. And that's the problem. I don't think it'll be edifying for King Charles, and I don't think it'll be good for the monarchy. I don't think it'll be good for Britain. But in the end, he is a constitutional monarch.
Thank you very much, Tom Bauer. And in the interest of balance, I'll once again remind you that there are plenty of voices, including amongst colleagues of mine here at Talk TV and other journalists, other people in Britain who would like to see apologies and reparations. And that was the opinion of Tom Bauer, who we appreciate coming in this evening to wrap up everything to do with the Royals at the moment. There's a lot going on. Next here on Primetime, it is Super Tuesday, one of the most hotly anticipated fixtures of the US electoral cycle, where 16 states choose candidates for the 2024 presidential election. Stay with us.
Hey, very good morning to you.
Thanks for joining us.
You're with Talk TV, on radio,
online,
and we're on your smart speaking.
Now, you ain't going to have an Eve it, me old Chinas, but a new report is calling for a new definition of cockney.
All right, Jeremy, me old China.
All right,
Rosie,
stop.
oi, oi, treacle.
When J.K. Rowling says, let's just be honest, that's all she's saying, let's just be honest. When a man goes out and kills, we should talk about them as what they are, a biological man. Trans woman, it's not a woman, trans woman is a man.
Lee would have to go much further than his statement. I mean, he did say that he spoke clumsily and he understood the Prime Minister's position, but I think he'd need to say that he got it wrong.
And I had a phone call this morning from Plymouth City Council, a lovely woman called Anna. And yeah, I've just received an email just saying that, yeah, I'm going to be getting a badge.
Quite right too. Quite right too. It's that time again to get the violins out. That's right. Prince Harry has lost his bid for UK security after moaning he'd been singled out.
You might as well be discussing an invasion of Daleks for all I really get this. but I am now on social media, having been dragged off my £8 Nokia, reluctantly kicking and screaming. I'm a huge hit on Instagram, as you probably know.
What are you doing? I was just about to do it.
Ooh! It's carry on. What just happened?
Whoa, missing.
There was a suggestion by some that maybe it would be nice to put a statue of the Queen on the fourth plinth. Mr. Khan apparently wasn't too keen on that.
I'm sorry. I know what's coming and I can't stop laughing.
So he suggested alternatives. There's a sweet potato.
That's quite a small statue then. Wasn't there also a prostitute?
A trans sex worker.
You don't really need one of those in Trafalgar Square. You just got to walk up to Soho. So you 40 minutes.
Why do you know this?
Because I know everything.
Was he just unlucky getting that question with an ice cream, or is it a sign of something more?
Seemed like he was on a late-night show to attract a young demographic, and they put him in an ice cream store.
I read the statement this morning from the family. And if any police officer reads that statement, if you don't cry for what you read from what the family is saying, it's heartbreaking, then you shouldn't be a police officer.
The UK, I'd say, had lots of racism within it. I don't necessarily think it's a racist country, but it permeates our institutions.
Yeah, but for her to say, come out and vote, and by the way, when I was 22 years old and I had an affair with a married man that I knew was married, the feminists failed me. I'm sorry.
I think the feminists did fail her.
We're supposed to
It
have
was
moved on
another
from that.
era.
She was 22. We're supposed to have moved on from that. Don't hark back on something you did that was wrong.
Talk TV. It's the only place where you get the truth.
This is Talk TV.
Some breaking news to bring you on a story we covered earlier in the show. Birmingham Council has approved those colossal cuts to public services, along with a 21% rise in council tax over 2 years. Astonishing news there for Birmingham residents this evening. We'll continue to cover that story here on Prime Time. Let's look to the US, though, now, shall we? Plenty of interesting things happening. A certain Super Tuesday. 16 states and 1 US territory are casting their ballots on Super Tuesday. The results of today's vote will determine the two major parties' presidential candidates ahead of this November election. However, this year's race is already dominated by clear frontrunners, Democratic President Joe Biden and Republican candidate Donald Trump. Nikki Haley is the last Republican opponent standing against Trump, but she lags far behind in the polls. And if she pulls out, the race for the White House will officially be a rerun of what we saw in 2020. Well, for more on this, let's head over to our friend Fox contributor Joe Concha. Joe, can't get enough of you at the moment. See you every night. There's so much.
Seriously.
There's so much. I mean, seriously, there's so much going on. And we had you giving us a preview of Super Tuesday yesterday, reminding us why it's so important. I know we can't speculate on what the outcome is going to be from the voting, but what's the vibe like stateside at the moment?
Oh, we could absolutely speculate. You can't, Rosanna. You're a professional. I'm the guy who comes on and gives opinions and shares my feelings. So I will go out on a limb and say that Donald Trump will win all 15 states by decided margins. When I say decided, we're talking anywhere from 70 points to as low as 50. That'll be the low mark if he only wins by 50 points. Donald Trump will therefore be within only a couple of delegates from clinching the nomination. Nikki Haley could either drop out because clearly she has zero path because you have to win, a state at some point, or, in this case, a majority. And Donald Trump versus Joe Biden is the rematch that we're going to get.
It's the big old rematch. Look, voters in Michigan have cast ballots marked uncommitted rather than voting for Biden. Can you explain why that is?
It's mainly the Arab Muslim community in Michigan, where they have a very large population relatively, and they do not like the way this president and Joe Biden has handled the Israel-Hamas war. They sympathize with the residents of Gaza. They feel that Israel has gone too far in terms of their bombings of innocents, and as a result, they are trying to send a message to Biden that you better get a ceasefire and have it hold there, or else we're going to stay home on Election Day. And if that happens in a state like Michigan, which is probably the most crucial of all 50 states as far as Republicans and Democrats are concerned, Joe Biden loses that, he likely loses the presidency. Rosanna.
Now, you mentioned 15 of the 16 states you reckon are going to go in there for Trump. Which is the one that isn't in your mind?
Well, what I mean is, there are 16 contests, 15 are states, and 1 is a territory. So it's not a U.S. state, but they still get a say in our election to a certain extent.
Okay.
So Trump will win that as well. I said that clumsily.
Oh, no, not at all. Nice technicality and pick you up on. Look, last night we talked about Nikki Haley, who was the main Republican contender for the nomination against Trump. And you and I were talking about what keeps her going, what gets her up in the morning. How does she still stay motivated when Trump is so far ahead? Do you expect her to actually officially drop out tonight?
I expect her to drop out after tonight for running for the Republican nomination. But there is a third-party option for her. It's called No Labels. They're trying to get on all the ballots of all 50 U.S. states. And she is being courted by this organization as somebody who has name recognition, two-time governor, obviously the last one standing against Trump, although barely standing. So she could still run, it just wouldn't be on the Republican side. And if she does go to a third party, that could be big trouble for Donald Trump, because when the margins are so small, she can make the difference the way Ross Perot did in 1992 when Bill Clinton only won with 43% of the vote.
That's fascinating. Nice little detail there. Look, Joe, always good value. We'll let you get back to counting your ballots now. And we'll speak soon.
Thank you,
sure.
Rosanna. And I only come on with you every night because I like you. If I didn't, I'd find something else to do, believe me.
Look
So
at that.
let's do it again tomorrow.
Why not? That's a date, Joe. Thanks, Joe Concha. I'm now joined in the studio by Chair of Republicans Overseas, Greg Swenson. Also down the line by former 2020 Republican presidential candidate himself, Joe Walsh. Joe, good to see you again as well. And Greg. Thank you both. Let's pick up, Greg, on what we were hearing there from Joe Concha, that Nikki Haley could actually go and become, start running for a third party. How disruptive would that be?
Well, it would be very disruptive. I thought she had said it on a few occasions in the last few weeks that she would not do that. But it would be, I think, really devastating for President Trump, because she'd take a lot of the moderate and independent voters, as well as the never-Trumpers that have supported her. So I think just from a purely, analytical perspective, it would be very bad news for President Trump.
Interesting. Joe Walsh joins the conversation as well. What have you made of Nikki Haley in this race?
Look, she's never really had a chance, and I know, and it's always good to be with you, and I like you too and love coming on with you. Not the other Joe.
We can fight about this later, gents.
Look, this has been Trump's nomination from the beginning. It's Donald Trump's party. Nikki Haley knows that. I don't know why she's still in, because I still expect her to get out after tonight, and I still expect her to endorse Donald Trump. And if that's the case, she's done herself enormous damage as a Republican.
How do you feel about Trump being the obvious nomination now, Joe?
Well, it devastates me, right? Former long-time Republican, lifelong Republican, because I believe Trump is an existential threat to our democracy. So I'm in a position, again, where conservative Joe Walsh, I'm going to do all I can to help get Joe Biden elected. And there are a lot of centrist and Republicans and conservatives like me who will do the same.
Greg, are you one of those centrist or conservatives overseas that would actually rather see Biden in power?
Well, I'm definitely a conservative overseas, but I would definitely do not want Biden to win. Trump is an acquired taste. You might not like his delivery, his unfiltered rhetoric, but they said this about him in 2016, and the world was pretty good from 2017 to 20. And he didn't blow up the planet. He didn't become a dictator. He was not an authoritarian. Yes, his delivery is unpleasant sometimes, but if you look at what he's done and what he could do in a second term, I was supporting Ron DeSantis. I agree in many ways with Joe that Trump really was the front runner from the beginning. And whether you like him or not, his policies and his outcomes are so much better than what we've seen the last 3 years. And I think that's why you're seeing it in the polls. 6 months ago, I would have said, if it's Biden and Trump, Biden will win. But lately, given the disaster that is the Biden administration, you're starting to see polls. Trump's been leading in the polls since October on average. The margins are getting a little larger, and on every major issue, 9 out of 10 top issues for the American electorate, Trump leads on 9 out of 10.
How much of that is down to the law? Go on, Joe.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say respectfully, I agree that if the election were held tomorrow, Trump would win. And again, I find that scary. And I've got no problem with Trump's vibe or the way he carries himself. I do want to look at what he did. Donald Trump tried to overthrow an American election, damn it. He's the only president in American history who lost an election and didn't have the balls, the courage, or the decency to participate in the peaceful transfer of power. And then he tried to overthrow that election. That's something he did. And I think that's a hell of a lot more important than disagreeing with Joe Biden on this or that policy.
Greg, what do you say to that? I know that Trump has kind of galvanized his base with this idea, or what he says is factually an Operation Witch Hunt lawfare, all these suits against him in criminal cases. It's all just been drummed up by his opposition. But if he does, get to run for the White House whilst also sitting on various criminal trials. What does that say about republicanism in America?
What it says is that this lawfare and this weaponization of the justice system has really started to annoy people. And even the Supreme Court was unanimous last night with, overturning the Colorado case where, four Democrat Supreme Court justices in Colorado voted to eliminate Trump from the ballot. Americans see that as completely unfair. You might not like January 6th. Nobody did. Okay, that was disgraceful. But look at it in context, and I think that's what voters are doing now. They're looking back 4 or 5 years, and they're saying, yes, disgraceful day, not a good moment. But what about the riots? And I don't like to do whataboutism, but in the context of the 2020 BLM and Antifa riots, where people actually died, where there was destruction. And again, I'm not advocating that Jan 6 was a good thing. It was horrible.
Yeah, and people did die
a bunch of clowns,
in January 6th.
Yeah, one who was shot by, an unarmed protester
and
shot by a federal
was
officer.
deemed to be an insurrection of a Capitol building.
Ugly, very ugly. And I'm not advocating for it, but people are looking at context. They're saying Trump is loud, he's obnoxious, he's unfiltered with his rhetoric. Biden, on the other hand, is not an angel, right? He's got some major family corruption issues. He's got, he's been angry, he's been defensive, he's expressed bravado in his press conferences. He's not exactly the unifier that he promised in 2020. So I think, look, this is one moment where people can it's a referendum on 2 administrations. And that's very unusual in American politics. Hasn't happened in over 100 years. So people are just looking at, how is my wallet, how's my pocketbook doing versus 4 years ago? My food prices are up 20%. My petrol prices are up 25%. It's not good. And the open border is an insult to many Americans, especially the poor woman who died at the University of Georgia last week. These are issues that are important to Americans. We can't ignore them.
As you know, as an American in Britain, it's what a lot of the British election is going to be fought on as well. Joe Walsh, some final comments from you.
Look, it's not a referendum on 2 administrations. This election's a referendum on our democracy. Donald Trump tried to overthrow an election. He's promised us that if he's reelected, he will be a dictator. He will jail his political opponents and shut down media he doesn't like. I don't think that's what America wants. Let's hope that's not what America wants.
You've both had your stall to set up this evening. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, but we'll see you again soon. Greg Swenson and Joe Walsh, thank you.
Thanks.
Next here on Prime Time, I'm going to be joined by the panel. Back in the studio, we'll go over some other headlines for today, including a rare insight into Rishi Sunak's domestic life. That coming up next.
Hey, very good morning to you.
Thanks for joining us.
You're with Talk TV, on radio,
online.
And we're on your smart speaker.
Now, you ain't going to have and Eve it, me old Chinas, but a new report is calling for a new definition of cockney.
All right, Jeremy, me old China.
All
Rosie,
right,
oi, oi, treacle.
When J.K. Rowling says, let's just be honest, that's all she's saying, let's just be honest. When a man goes out and kills, we should talk about them as what they are, a biological man. Trans woman, it's not a woman. Trans woman is a man.
Lee would have to go much further than his statement. I mean, he did say that he spoke clumsily and he understood the Prime Minister's position, but I think he'd need to say that he'd got it wrong.
Then I had a phone call this morning from Plymouth City Council, a lovely woman called Anna. And yeah, I've just received an email just saying that, yeah, I'm going to be getting a badge.
Quite right too.
It's that time again to get the violins out. That's right. Prince Harry has lost his bid for UK security after moaning he'd been singled out.
Now, you might as well be discussing an invasion of Daleks for all I really get this. but I am now on social media, having been dragged off my £8 Nokia, reluctantly kicking and screaming. I'm a huge hit on Instagram, as you probably know.
What are you doing? I was just about to do it. Ooh! It's Carry On What Just Happened. Whoa, listen.
There was a suggestion by some that maybe it would be nice to put a statue of the Queen on the 4th blimp. Mr. Khan apparently wasn't too keen on that.
I'm sorry. I know it's coming and I can't stop laughing.
So he suggested alternatives. There's a sweet potato.
That's quite a small statue then. Wasn't there also a prostitute?
A trans sex worker.
You don't really need one of those in Trafalgar Square. You just got to walk up to Soho. It's only about 40 minutes.
Why do you know this?
Because I know everything.
Was he just unlucky getting that question with an ice cream, or is it a sign of something more?
Seemed like he was on a late night show to attract a young demographic, and they put him in an ice cream store.
I read the statement this morning from the family. And if any police officer reads that statement, if you don't cry for what you read from what the family is saying, it's heartbreaking, then you shouldn't be a police officer.
The UK, I'd say, has lots of racism within it. I don't necessarily think it's a racist country, but it permeates our institutions.
Yeah, but for her to say, come out and vote, and by the way, when I was 22 years old and I had an affair with a married man that I knew was married, the feminists failed me. I'm sorry.
I think the feminists did fail her. It was another era.
She was 22. We're supposed to have moved on from that. Don't hark back on something you did that was wrong.
Talk TV. It's the only place where you get the truth.
Welcome back. Time now for our panel to dissect some other big stories from the day. Joining me in the studio, political editor of The Sun on Sunday, Kate Ferguson, and UK editor of Politico, Jack Blanchard. Great to see you both. Let's start with some glossies, shall we? Women's glossy magazine Grazia has interviewed Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his wife Akshata Murthy ahead of International Women's Day this Friday. The magazine is looking at the division of domestic labour among heterosexual couples. In a series of 3 Instagram posts by the mag, the couple discuss children, chores, Rishi's cooking, and the little leisure time that the Prime Minister has. And this is all part of the kind of humanisation of the leaders in the race for the election. We start to see behind the scenes, get a peek. And what we learned from this today, Kate, is that Rishi Sunak's really good at stacking a dishwasher.
Good at stacking a dishwasher, also good at making the bed, apparently. Yeah, this is kind of classic pre-election fare, isn't it? Come on, politicians, tell us a little bit about yourself. Are you human? When we were in the green room earlier, I was saying to Jack, can you remember your favourite kind of humanisation anecdote? And he said his was Theresa May's field of wheat, the naughtiest thing she ever did. Mine was obviously when Theresa May said there was like boy jobs and girls jobs, and the boys' job was to take the bin out. And I think the girls' job was to like cook the dinner or whatever. Oh, if only I had a boy to take my bins out. Unfortunately, I have to take mine out.
Oh, man. Jack, do you think this has been a success in humanising Rishi?
I mean, it's got people talking about him a bit like he's more human. I mean, there is nothing that screams there's an election coming like the sight of a politician sat with their spouse on a sofa talking about domestic chores, is it? They always seem to have this. I'm pretty sure voters can see through it. I'd like to think that this is not going to win or lose Rishi Sunak any votes at all. But I guess, you know, they are told by their advisors that they have to seem more human, and so they're trying to do that. That's fair.
I mean, stunning stuff to find out that Rishi Sunak leaves the office to go home to make the bed when it's not made well enough. That is a man who likes his hospital corners.
That's a bit weird, honestly. I mean, I know he lives above his office.
Okay,
but
fine.
still.
In defence of Rishi, I have a thing where I have to make my bed before I leave. Otherwise, I feel really chaotic.
But why doesn't he do it before he leaves? Why does he go back?
Because I think he's just getting up at like 3 o'clock, isn't he?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Fairly busy. We'll have to see how that goes down. Look, elsewhere, let's talk about all things Greggs. Greggs Bakery is an absolute storming success. We know that sausage rolls, steak bakes for everyone. The bakery chain has reported a record annual profit this month. Staff in their thousands will share a £17.6 million bonus pot. Some workers could stand to receive over 700 quid. Let's all go work at Greggs. There is good news for customers as well. The chain has no plans for further price increases this year. I mean, are they just becoming... I mean, I hesitate to say this because we'll probably, you know, I hope not to forbear some terrible thing, but they seem to be doing incredibly well. To the point, is it too big to fail, Kate?
Yeah, they kind of seem to be booming when everyone else is struggling in the high street.
Yeah.
And also, like, it's more that they're just doing well with sales. They're kind of like this cultural icon now, aren't they? Like, everyone has a Greggs. They opened a Greggs in Westminster Station about 3 years ago, was it? And it was the talk of the political class, kind of, oh, we're getting a Greggs, rah, rah, rah. Anyway, yeah, they seem to be doing really well, and good for them, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, it is a sort of, it's a big part of the UK, is pastry goods. Jack, but do you think they're putting smaller bakeries out of business? Is that the sort of spin we'll find on this?
I mean, I suppose that is probably true, but they're also popping up where you never would have found hot baked goods before, like Westminster Station, right? I mean, the thing is, Greggs was always massive in the north of England. Like when I was growing up, there was Greggs everywhere, and you used to go to like Leeds or Manchester, and there was jokes about there was one every 10 yards or something. He seems to have now infiltrated the heart of the capital, and that's why I assume their profits are getting even bigger, but also they've sort of got this real cultural penetration down here now as well. And I don't know anybody who doesn't like a Greggs, really. I mean, like, they are producing a great product at a great price. And when people are a bit skint, you know, you can normally afford a steak bake or whatever. So I just feel like it works for people and, you know, right across the spectrum.
Our Middlesbrough producer in my ear currently saying it's Northern Pret.
Yeah, exactly. Because it used to be you couldn't go 10 yards in London without bumping into a Pret, but some of them have closed now.
And Greggs did fight tooth and nail as well to get their sort of late licence for sausage rolls in London recently. Let's talk about, but you wouldn't think we'd talk about this, Uzbekistan, which is apparently the only nation more unhappy than Britain at the moment. The Central Asian country ranked 71st. The UK not behind, far behind at 70 in terms of mood, perspective on life and self-esteem in 2023. Other UK stats included a well-being score of 49, well below the global average of 65. And it is quite the shocking list. It's to do with quality of life and mental health and well-being, and it's pretty depressing reading, Kate.
Yeah, this is depressing. I've never been to Uzbekistan, so I can't like directly compare the two countries.
I have been,
you have been,
and I can say that. No offence to Uzbekistan, but I would hope that Britain would be ranked somewhere around the realms of Europe.
Yeah, it does feel like we're kind of a bit gloomy about ourselves at the moment, a bit down on ourselves, and maybe we do need to shake ourselves out of it a little bit.
Yeah, perhaps. Jack, any big shockers for you in this?
I think it depends on what time of year you ask people in Britain how jolly they're feeling. This time of year, it's pretty tricky. Like February, March, it's still a bit grim, isn't it? Come back in June, everyone's having a great time. The big ons are full, the parks are full, people are looking forward to the holidays. So I think we're very much an up and down nation.
Indeed. What I can tell you about Uzbekistan, having been there myself, is they have really good pastry goods. So maybe there's a correlation there between Britain and Uzbekistan over the fact that we all rely on a bit of baked bread goods to
Greggs
make
will be
ourselves
taking
happier.
over there next.
Kate Ferguson and Jack Blanchard, thank you very much. And we've got Mike Graham coming up tonight on the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. That's all we've got time for tonight here on Primetime. It's been lovely seeing you. We'll see you again same time tomorrow. Good night.
Ever feel like you're not part of the conversation?
That you're not getting the full picture on the important issues.
Or the stories that impact your life.
Jim, who was on in the last hour waiting a year for a heart operation, blew us out the water.
Well, at Talk TV, we cover the issues you care about.
I would love to give the nurses a massive pay rise.
Give them one, then.
With proper debate and argument.
We tell it how it really is.
And have some fun along the way.
Talk TV for the stories that matter.
Independent Republic of Mike Graham. Weeknights at 8 on Talk TV.
Hey, very good morning to you.
Thanks for joining us.
You're with Talk TV, on radio,
online.
You're on your smart speaking.
Now, you ain't going to ab and eve it, me old Chinas, but a new report is calling for a new definition of cockney.
All right, Jeremy, me old China. Rosie,
All right, stop.
oi, oi, treacle.
When J.K. Rowling says, let's just be honest, that's all she's saying, let's just be honest. When a man goes out and kills, we should talk about them as what they are, a biological man. Trans woman, it's not a woman. Trans woman is a man.
Lee would have to go much further than his statement. I mean, he did say that he spoke clumsily and he understood the Prime Minister's position, but I think he'd need to say that he got it wrong.
Then I had a phone call this morning from Plymouth City Council, a lovely woman called Anna. And yeah, I've just received an email just saying that, yeah, I'm going to be getting a badge.
Quite right too.
It's that time again to get the violins out. That's right. Prince Harry has lost his bid for UK security after moaning he'd been singled out.
You might as well be discussing an invasion of Daleks for all I really get this. But I am now on social media, having been dragged off my £8 Nokia, reluctantly kicking and screaming. I'm a huge hit on Instagram, as you probably know.
What are you doing? I was just about to do it. Ooh! It's carry on. What just happened? We're missing.
There was a suggestion by some that maybe it would be nice to put a statue of the Queen on the